What happens when the nation's top law enforcement officer is asked point-blank about pardons for those who tried to tear down the Capitol and refuses to give a straight answer? That was the moment that left a congressional hearing buzzing, because it wasn't just about legal theory or paperwork. It was about whether the rules of democracy can be bent, twisted, and even broken for the sake of political loyalty. Within seconds, the room shifted. Congressman Joe Morell pressed for clarity, and Attorney General Pam Bondi reached for every excuse in the book. And that tension, that dodge, and that uncomfortable silence that followed tells us more about the state of our democracy than any press release ever could. The exchange began with numbers that should stop anyone cold. In 2024, Capitol Police identified nearly 9,500 threats against lawmakers.
Chairman and Ranking Member Meng for holding this important hearing, and thank you, Attorney General Bondi, for appearing before us today. Madam Attorney General, I serve in addition to the Appropriations Committee as a ranking member of the Committee on House Administration. I sent you a letter last week along with my Republican counterpart, Chairman Brian Stile, requesting an increase in federal prosecutory resources to address threats against members of Congress, particularly in light of what happened last week in Minnesota, that tragedy. In 2024, the U.S. Capitol Police identified and received nearly 9,500 concerning statements or threats against members. Federal prosecutors have only secured 8 convictions so far, and the heightened threat environment demands an all-hands-on-deck approach. Will you commit to assigning an assistant U.S. attorney or a special assistant U.S. attorney in each of the 94 federal districts to, at least on a part-time basis, investigate and prosecute threats against members of Congress?
So thank you for bringing that up, and I take that very seriously. Not only what happened in Minnesota was horrible. I've spoken to Keith Ellison. I've spoken to Amy Klobuchar about that. It's horrible. We are involved in that. The FBI was involved. Our U.S. attorneys are involved. Many of these are district to district. So the way we're doing that is, I will tell you, my National Security Division is involved in all of those and assisting in those. We meet every single morning and we discuss that. But many of those, Minnesota, will be handled in the state in which it happened. Another one is Governor, I'm sorry if I can keep going. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I don't mean
Quickly,
to
though.
I filibuster. Governor Shapiro and what happened in Pennsylvania with Governor Shapiro. I've spoken to Governor Shapiro. We are working hand in hand, our U.S. attorney with the district attorney there, hand in hand, just like in Minnesota. I made sure our U.S. attorney and our district attorneys there were working hand in hand. Political party doesn't matter when something like this happens. And I also want to make sure all members of Congress are safe as well.
Okay, and I would reiterate, Chairman Stile and I think Chairman Stile and I agree that at least a part-time in each of the 94 districts would be appropriate. Let me change topics for just a moment.
I'm really quick on that. Yes, we're doing that through our National Security Division, so I think that's already in the works, and I would be glad to meet with you in a secure facility to talk about that.
Very good, thank you. Continuing, in addition to my role here, the committee that I serve on as an authorizer oversees Capitol security as well as federal elections, so I'm closely following the aftermath of January 6th. Recently, several defendants who received presidential pardons related to that day are now arguing in court that the pardon covers crimes like, for instance, illegal firearm possession discovered in a search of an individual's home in California months after January 6th. What's your position on whether the pardons cover these separate offenses?
The pardon power rests with the president, not the Department of Justice, and some of that is pending litigation, and I cannot discuss pending litigation.
Well, I'm not asking you about who has the right to a pardon. I think as the Department of Justice in February wrote, the pardon is an act of grace which removes the punishment from a crime a person has committed. It further said, in its effect, the granting of a pardon is in no sense the overturning of a judgment of conviction. It is an executive action that mitigates or sets aside punishment. So as the chief law enforcement officer, what's your opinion, not the president's power of whether he can offer a pardon? That's pretty clear in the Constitution. But for crimes committed unrelated to January 6th, would you suggest that the pardons would cover activities or crimes potentially committed outside of that by the same person?
Well, I don't know if you're referring to Joe Biden pardoning his son after he said he would not pardon Hunter Biden, or the
No, I actually
commutation
referred to
of all
January
the,
6th. I'm
all,
sorry.
all the sentences that,
Well,
the people that were on death row. I've met with those families,
No,
and all of those sentences were commuted. I'm not going to comment on pardons on either side of the aisle.
so, well, I'm not asking about either side. I'm asking, you're the chief law enforcement officer in the United States. You have a responsibility directly, you swore an oath to the Constitution, not the president. Want to know what your views are on the extent to which pardons cover potential crimes committed by individuals who've been pardoned but unrelated to January 6th.
Do you mean the ones that were done by the auto pen? I'm not going to discuss
right.
anything that
Mr.
could be
Chairman,
or not be
I
pending litigation.
respectfully, Ms. DeLauro accused you of filibustering. I think that's the height of filibustering. This is a serious, serious topic. And for you to suggest that you don't have an opinion or to divert to other things that have nothing to do with January 6 pardons, I think is frankly demeaning to your responsibilities and your job. With that, I'll yield back.
9,500 moments where elected officials feared for their safety, their families, and their lives. And yet, federal prosecutors have managed to secure only 8 convictions. 8. Think about that for a moment. Imagine a neighborhood plagued by thousands of violent incidents, and only a handful of arrests actually stick. That's not a functioning system. That's a system in free fall. But instead of reckoning with that failure, Bondi used those statistics as a shield, redirecting attention away from the issue Morell had raised and into safer political territory, because what Morell was asking about was not vague, not hypothetical, and not just some courtroom puzzle. He wanted to know, are pardons being used as get-out-of-jail-free cards for the people who stormed the Capitol? And if so, do those pardons stretch far beyond January 6th itself? It's a question that cuts to the core of accountability. Pardons are supposed to be rare acts of grace, not tools of corruption. But instead of addressing that, Bondi pivoted. She tried to talk about threats, about Biden, about unrelated cases. The pivot was sharp, almost rehearsed, and it exposed something deeper: the unwillingness to confront the uncomfortable reality that pardons are being twisted into political weapons. And make no mistake, this wasn't just a clever debate move. This was a deliberate attempt to shift the spotlight from one of the most dangerous precedents in American political life, rewarding those who engaged in political violence. Morell called her on it. He didn't let it slide. Because the issue isn't Biden. The issue isn't unrelated prosecutions. The issue is that allies of a movement that tried to overturn an election are being shielded from consequences, and the very system designed to enforce the law is being bent to accommodate them. This is where the conversation turned explosive. Morell asked whether pardons could cover crimes committed after January 6th, like illegal firearm possession months later. Think about the stakes here. If a pardon for storming the Capitol can also cover a gun charge unrelated to that day, then what's the limit? The pardon becomes not an end to a punishment, but a lifetime license to break the law. And Bondi wouldn't answer. She hid behind the phrase, pending litigation, even though the question was about principle, not about an active case. That silence spoke volumes. But the truth is, the threat doesn't just come from legal loopholes. It comes from the pipeline of extremism itself. The same rhetoric that fired up the mob on January 6th is fueling the rise in threats against members of Congress today. The same networks, the same platforms, the same ecosystem of outrage that celebrated storming the Capitol now drives a steady stream of violence and intimidation. Morell knew it, and Bondi knew it too. Yet she condemned the threats in public while continuing to protect the political machine that produces them. That's the contradiction at the heart of this crisis. On one side, public statements about safety. On the other, a quiet refusal to hold allies accountable. And here's the real scandal. The justice system isn't failing by accident. It's failing by design. When the violence comes from extremists who are politically useful, the machinery of enforcement slows down. The FBI passes the buck. U.S. attorneys hesitate. The Department of Justice splinters into jurisdictional debates. And in the end, out of thousands of threats, we see 8 convictions. That's not a lack of resources. That's a lack of will. Because political leaders want to look tough on crime, except when the crime comes from their own base. That's why this hearing mattered. Morell wasn't just asking questions. He was exposing the fault lines in our democracy. Every dodge, every filibuster, Every refusal to take responsibility peeled back another layer of the problem. The pardon debate wasn't just a legal back and forth. It was a window into how political violence is being excused, rationalized, and in some cases, rewarded. And if that pattern continues, the consequences won't just be more hearings. There'll be more violence, more threats, and more erosion of public trust. Pardons are supposed to be acts of mercy, not weapons of politics. But what this exchange revealed is that the line has been blurred. When Bondi insisted she couldn't comment, she wasn't being neutral. She was making a choice to protect a system that allows political allies to benefit from special treatment. And that choice sets a precedent with dangerous ripple effects. Because if pardons can be stretched to cover crimes beyond the original offense, if they can be used to protect allies while silencing critics, then we are watching the slow transformation of the presidency into something closer to monarchy. That's not exaggeration. That's the reality of unchecked power. Imagine a future where any president, Republican or Democrat, can hand out pardons like political currency. Friends get a free pass. Enemies get crushed. Accountability disappears. And the public? They're left wondering if the justice system even belongs to them anymore. That's why outrage is spreading across the country. People aren't just worried about who gets pardoned. They're worried about whether the rule of law means anything at all. And in that moment, Joe Morell's persistence mattered. He wasn't content to let Bondi deflect, to let her talk about Biden, or to let her drown the issue in vague references to national security. He forced her to confront the uncomfortable truth, even if she refused to answer. He made clear that this isn't just about January 6th. It's about the future of how power is used and abused in America. And it's about whether leaders will stand up to political violence or enable it.so. Let's call this for what it is. Nearly 9,500 threats, 8 convictions, and an attorney general unwilling to give a straight answer on the abuse of pardons. That's not just a legal problem. That's a national crisis. Because at its core, this isn't about left versus right. It's about democracy versus mob rule. It's about whether the highest office in the land can be used to shield allies and silence critics. And it's about whether the justice system is strong enough to stand up to political pressure. Joe Morell exposed that tension. And now, the question is what happens next. Do we accept a future where pardons are political favors, where threats are ignored, and where accountability vanishes? Or do we demand something better? That choice isn't just in the hands of lawmakers. It's in the hands of every person watching, reading, and deciding whether to accept the slow erosion of democracy or to fight back against it.so. What do you think? Are we watching justice unfold or the slow collapse of accountability? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this video with someone who needs to hear the truth. Because the next story we're covering is even more controversial, and you won't want to miss it.